Well, for law enforcement, using a high-tech tool, catching a criminal can be as easy as just finding their phone number.
But critics worry this new technology could also lead to unconstitutional surveillance. Tom Lydon of the Fox 9 Investigators has been looking into this technology. Tom, why is there so much secrecy around this?
I think part of it's pretty simple. Police don't want the bad guys to know all their tricks. And, we've tried to be conscious of that in the reporting of this story tonight. There are other important principles in the balance, of course, like transparency and accountability. We discovered that court orders authorizing this technology, warrants that under state law should have been made public after 90 days, have been routinely and systematically sealed. It means a powerful police surveillance tool has had almost no public oversight or scrutiny until now. It's a question for our times. Do we still have the right to disappear?
It sounds crazy.
To vanish without a trace?
We're all carrying around microphones in our pockets and GPS transmitters.
How do we even get off the grid when we've become such a part of it?
We would never want to violate the law.
Will we even know if we're being watched?
Do you think you were misled by law enforcement?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Welcome to the state of surveillance. St. Paul's Cathedral Hill neighborhood last month. A law clerk has gunned down the alleged killer, a disgruntled client, on the run. The clock ticking. But detectives have his cell phone number, and that'll be all they need to track him down and arrest him by that night.
This technology has been absolutely critical for us to locate some of Minnesota's most violent criminals more quickly than we ever were able to before.
Drew Evans is in charge of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. He says his agents are using this technology about 60 times a year. But because of a confidentiality agreement with the FBI, he's not even allowed to call the device by its real name, Stingray.
Just this week alone, we located a level 3 predatory offender that was non-compliant, a suspect in a series of serial rapes, and a homicide suspect this week alone.
This is one of the few known pictures of Stingray from its manufacturer's sales catalog. Originally developed for the military, it's part of a whole class of devices known as cellular exploitation technologies that go by such names as Kingfish, Gossamer, and Fishhawk. Stingray works by essentially mimicking a cell phone tower, rerouting up to 10,000 cell phone signals in a 3-mile radius, allowing law enforcement to track down a single cell phone down to within just a few feet.
I recognized, just like he did, that it was a surveillance mission.
Independent journalist Sam Richards believes he first spotted Stingray being used by small aircraft circling the Twin Cities, then discovering a similar pattern in other cities. Richards discovered 62 small aircraft around the country registered to dummy corporations connected to the Justice Department. The Associated Press later confirmed his reporting.
So it was pinged twice.
Recently, Richards believes someone in law enforcement was using Stingray to spy on protesters occupying the 4th Precinct after the police killing of Jamar Clark. Using an app called Snoop Snitch, he spotted cell phones automatically switching over to a more powerful cell tower.
Therefore, your suspicion, this is someone out there acting like a cell tower.
I think they were honestly just collecting names and locations of people.
What about all the other cell phones that you're picking up?
What we're doing when we're utilizing this technology is the technology is looking for a specific target phone that we're looking for. We are not able to identify random people on the network and say this is Drew Evans on the network or somebody else when we're looking at it.
Look at Mr. Lydon. I have very much a distrust of our lead police agency, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, as it relates to this matter of Stingray and Kingfish and cellular telephone technology.
Rich Neumeister is a privacy rights advocate. 2 years ago, he lobbied state lawmakers to require a court order for Stingray, one that in public hearings he insisted would be public.
I just want to make sure that there's not permanent secrecy on this kind of thing.
That is certainly the House's intent.
Law enforcement pushed back on that hard. They said, you can't do that. You can't put us in that box. We're catching all kinds of bad guys.
State Representative John Lesh says law enforcement didn't want to call it a search warrant, so they compromised on something they call a tracking warrant. Like a search warrant, a tracking warrant still requires probable cause and must still be signed by a judge. But a tracking warrant would automatically become public after 90 days. and the court would send a so-called target letter to the subject of the warrant, letting them know their phone was traced. Law enforcement could ask a judge to seal the tracking warrant for additional time, but that was supposed to be the exception, not the rule.
The sweet spot we arrived at for tracking warrants was 90 days. There's no reason that we should be hanging on to this data longer than 90 days if there's not a good reason for it.
But the Fox 9 investigators made a surprising discovery when we started showing up at courthouses looking for these tracking warrants. Even though as a general rule they were supposed to be made public after 90 days, they're all still sealed. That isn't the way this law was supposed to work. Not even close.
So why can't I find these tracking warrants at the courthouse? Why have I found that difficult?
I'd have to point you to the courts.
We did for 2 months. The chief judges of Hennepin and Ramsey County declined to talk on camera, but a spokesperson for the judicial branch told the Fox 9 investigators our request raised valid issues about when electronic tracking warrants should be unsealed. And the courts in Ramsey and Hennepin are now reviewing any sealed electronic tracking warrant to determine whether any should be unsealed. We've learned many judges didn't understand what they were signing, what statute applies to tracking warrants, or even what technology was being used. And target letters to those under surveillance were never sent, an apparent violation of the law.
Were you aware, just as a matter of course, that all these tracking warrants were being sealed?
No, I was not aware of that. And it surprises me because, of course, then you have the exception swallow the rule.
So do you think you were misled by law enforcement on this?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
The Fox 9 investigators could find only one tracking warrant that's ever been made public. And ironically, it may go back to those pings Sam Richards picked up at the 4th Precinct. Among the documents released in the Jamar Clark case, prosecutors needed a special court order to release, you guessed it, a tracking warrant. But it wasn't to collect the cell numbers of protesters. It was to find Jamar Clark's friend, Rayanne Hayes. The BCA had been unable to locate her to get a statement, so agents used her cell number to track her down with Stingray. And yet conspiracy theories will always find fertile ground whenever there's secrecy.
Maybe nobody's questioning it, but people are starting to question it now.
The American Revolution was ignited partially because of general warrants.
It's no small point how far government can go to conduct surveillance, what is the standard for warrants, and whether they're open records are not just questions for our time, they are questions as old as our republic. The only thing that's really changed is the technology.
And this technology's full capabilities are still a bit of a mystery. There are reports that Stingray or similar devices could be used to turn on cell phones that are already off, or even turn on your cell phone's microphone to eavesdrop on conversations. Drew Evans says the BCA isn't using any capability like that. For them, it is simply a tracking device. But guys, the problem is when so much is secret, at least to the public, there's always going to be that kind of speculation.
Well, does anyone else other than the BCA have this type of technology?
BCA apparently has 2. They won't say for sure, but we've heard that they have 2. Hennepin County Sheriff had 1, but they got rid of it after just a few years. They say they only used it about 4 times. And the U.S. Marshal's Office out of Chicago also has 1.
All right, you said the courts are obviously reviewing this, so could we see a change in the law?
We could. Representative Lesh told me that he is looking at that. He is thinking about adding something to the body camera bill that's supposed to come up next week. He thinks he can work an amendment in. And that obviously similar privacy issues, so it's sort of go with that. But I think the problem is, you know, these tracking warrants, they weren't even calling the device by its name within the tracking warrant. And I think judges simply didn't know what they were dealing with. And law enforcement is always going to tell you, we want it sealed, we want it sealed. And the judges just really weren't familiar with the law.
And until people come along and start asking questions and asking for them to be unsealed, it can just go along like this.
I think this opened up a lot of eyes. Apparently, the judges in Hennepin and Ramsey County are really struggling to find out, listen, how many of these warrants should be unsealed, and how do we get these letters out? Apparently, they don't even know who to send the letters to. It's not clear.
Right. Looks like you have a good follow-up.
We have many good follow-ups.
Thanks,
probably.
Tom.
Thank you.